Hello, my little rain clouds. I want to talk about motivation. A lot of people struggle with motivation. I myself am one of them, particularly with regards to doing things that we know will benefit us in the future, but that we really just don't feel like doing in the present. And time is such an important factor in our decision-making process, and yet we don't necessarily realize that so much of our decision-making is influenced by one person, one aspect of ourselves, our present self. We can break it down into thinking about three distinct selves. There's the present self, the experiencing self, who is experiencing this present moment. Right now, your present self is listening to a cool Australian guy talking, and right now my present self is doing some talking. But there's also our anticipating self, our self who is in the past looking to the future, looking forward to things that may happen, preparing for things that may happen, planning, fearing, anticipating, perhaps making hopeful plans, perhaps dreading what might come. And there's also our remembering self, self who is looking back at the past, remembering the past, dwelling on the past, thinking of things that have happened or things that might have happened, that could have happened if things had gone differently. So we have those three aspects of ourselves, and yet the one that drives so much of our decision-making is the one that really doesn't last very long at all. The present self, our experiencing self, drives so much of the decisions we make. They have so much of a say in what happens or doesn't happen. But when we think about it, the present doesn't last very long at all. That was the present. And now it's gone. Now it's the past. The present has ended, and now it's the future. Scientists have tried to define and measure the present, try to figure out what exactly is the present. How long does the present last? And the truth is, we don't really know. It depends on who you ask and what kind of perspective they have and what sort of science they're looking into. It might last only a fraction of a second. Some neuroscientists think maybe 2 or 3 seconds. Others might say our working memory, our sort of short-term memory, is about 10 to 15 seconds long, maybe about 12 seconds in general. So maybe that's how long the present really lasts. But either way, it's a very short space of time. And so when we're making so much of our decisions based on the present, and yet the present is so fleeting, we can often make some pretty terrible decisions. Decisions that really don't serve us very well. We can think about what might be good in the future, or we can think about things that happened in the past, things that we want to stop from happening again, or things that we want to happen again. We can think about time in lots of different ways. And yet, so much of our decision-making process is influenced by how we're feeling right now, by the emotions that we're experiencing, by the sensory information we're experiencing. We chase short-term pleasure. We chase that immediate reward, immediate gratification. We don't think about the past or about the future anywhere near as much as we think about the present. And yet, the present, it happens, and then it's over. And often we make decisions based on that present need, that present desire, the immediate short-term pleasure or whatever it is. And we don't really remember it later on. You know, I can remember pleasurable things that I've done, but I remember the event. I don't really remember the pleasurable sensation. I certainly can't conjure up the pleasure that I experienced before in its full potency, in the full power that pleasure had. I can't experience the same pleasure from a pleasurable activity that I did in the past. My memory is more like, oh yeah, that was a thing that happened and I did this and that was the sort of the situation. But I don't have the sensory input, the sensory experience of that pleasure. And by the same token, if I remember, something that was uncomfortable or unpleasant or painful, I don't remember the sensory experience of the pain or the displeasure, the discomfort. And yet, a lot of our short-term decision-making is about the avoidance of pain or discomfort or about seeking pleasure. And yet, it's so short-term. It's so fleeting. It's so ephemeral. It's there and then it's just gone. And I can't tell you the number of times where I could have gotten up and gone out and done something, special and important and memorable with my day, and instead I slept in. Or I did whatever was more comfortable or easier, more convenient. I do that a lot, as I'm sure a lot of people do, and yet, for what benefit? I don't have fond memories of all the times that I slept in. I don't have fond memories of when I stayed home and just chilled out rather than, going to some event or making the effort to go out on a walk or go hiking or spend time with friends or whatever it was. And there's nothing wrong with doing those things. There's nothing wrong with chilling out and taking it easy or having a sleep in once in a while. But we need to ask ourselves, how much benefit is there really that I'm getting from this? Am I making the decision based solely on the present? And am I discounting the benefits that I might get in the future? If I chose not to sleep in and I went on a walk or I spent some time with friends, I might make really lovely memories that I can then look back on with fondness. I can feel happy about, I can feel proud about. And the nice feelings that I may have from those experiences are in addition to the pleasure that I received from going out and doing those things in the present. They may or may not feel that great in the present, but when I look back on them, I can feel good about them too. And go, yeah, I'm glad that I did that thing. I'm proud of myself that I did that thing. I had a really nice experience. I'm glad that happened. My anticipating self might have gone to a lot of effort to plan something really lovely that they thought my present self would enjoy, and that my remembering self would look back on with fondness. And planning and anticipating and hoping and thinking about those things might have brought me pleasure too. But if I discount that when the time comes, if I forget about all that and go, screw it, I'm just going to stay home and sleep in, it's kind of a shame. It's not necessarily bad to do that once in a while, but I think it's good to honor that thing that your past self, your anticipating self, was looking forward to, that thing that they really wanted for you. And it's also kind of nice to do that for your remembering self, thinking in the future, I'm going to look back on this and go, yeah, that was good. I'm really glad that I did that. That was nice. And I feel proud of myself for that. And so I think it's kind of important that we start to think more about our past and future selves. There have been a lot of studies that have shown that people tend to think about their future selves as being another person. We engage the parts of our brain that we use when we think about other people rather than those parts of the brain that we use when we think about ourselves. So particularly if you're thinking about yourself in like 10 years' time or something, it's like you're thinking of a different person. But even like a couple of minutes, a couple of hours from now, you might think of them the way that you think of a different person. And so you may not be very motivated to do something that benefits them rather than benefiting the you right now, the experiencing self. But I think it's good to try and shift that, because people that tend to think more in the future, that make future-oriented decisions, they tend to benefit more and they tend to live better lives. Not always. Some people spend too much time focusing on the future. They might be workaholics or something, and they're always just thinking about earning, saving for the future, and they never stop to smell the roses. They never appreciate the present moment. And some people are too focused on the past, dwelling on the bad things, or even dwelling on the good old days. They don't spend enough time in the present or in the future. But I think that probably quite a lot of people spend most of their time thinking about their present self and acting based on the interests of their present self. I definitely do. And, historically, I guess thinking about the present self was good. When we were trying to survive, then focusing on the present is kind of important, because if you don't survive, then all the planning for the future that you made, that it doesn't really matter. You're dead. You don't have a future. But nowadays, most of us, at least, we're already surviving. Survival's kind of a given, and we don't really need to think about survival so much. We're thinking about thriving. We're thinking about trying to live better lives, lives that fulfill us, that make us feel good, that have good things in them. And so it's helpful to shift away from that present focus onto a future focus, shifting away from the short-term gain, the instant gratification, and thinking more about long-term benefit, or even just the near future. And if you understand that the present is really quite fleeting and that the future is always coming, then you'll probably spend more time thinking about future-oriented decisions rather than the immediate short term, which is typically a good thing. It's important to have a balance between past, present, and future, but I think for a lot of people, present is dominating everything. There's a really interesting field of therapy that's kind of up and coming called time perspective therapy, and I'll post a link in the description to it. It's really quite fascinating, the different perspectives that people have and the different problems that can come from how we think about time and where our focus tends to sit, or when our focus tends to sit, I suppose. But yeah, I think it's helpful to look back on times where you didn't make that short-term present-focused decision, and you did the thing that was good for your past or future selves. Thinking back to when you didn't sleep in and you did go for a walk, or you met up with your friends, or the times where you really didn't feel like doing your homework or your chores or whatever, but you did them anyway. And expressing gratitude to your past present self, the present self that made those decisions in the past, the self that decided not to think about the immediate short-term benefit and instead did what was going to be beneficial over the long term. Thinking about those times and being grateful to yourself for making those decisions, and thinking about the future as well, thinking, man, I'm really looking forward to this thing in the future, and I hope that my present self does that when the time comes. I think it's going to be great if I go and do this thing, or, I'm putting in the work now so that hopefully this thing comes to pass and I can make a good decision in the future, right? I'm organizing a hangout with my friends, and I understand that I might not feel like going at the time, but I'm really hoping that I do, because I think it's going to be special. I think it's going to be important, and I think it's going to be worth the effort, the discomfort, whatever, for me to go and do that. And maybe write yourself, your future present self, a letter from yourself now, your anticipating self, going, hey, look, I understand you might not want to go and do this thing, but I'm really hoping that you do it. And I hope that it's a great time. And I'm hoping it's going to be a good memory for us, and it's going to lead to a great future, that good things are going to come from it. I think that's a good thing to do. It encourages you to think more about your past and future selves and less about the present. And your present self can kind of anticipate, if you like, hey, I'm going to feel good about this later on. I'm going to look back and I'm going to be grateful to myself now for making the long-term decision. I'm going to be proud of myself for making that decision. My anticipating self was looking forward to this, and they would be so psyched if I actually did it. And my remembering self is going to be so glad that I did it. And they're going to be grateful to me. And they're going to be proud of me. And you know what? Knowing that actually feels pretty good right now. So that kind of sweetens the deal. It kind of motivates me, gives me a little push to do the thing that I maybe don't really want to do because it's not convenient or it's not comfortable, and I'd much rather do the immediate short-term thing. But maybe I will do that good thing. Maybe I will do the long-term play, because I know that my past and my future selves will be happy. And that's kind of a nice idea. Connecting with those other aspects of ourselves to make better decisions. I think that's a good thing to do, a habit to get into. And the more that you do that, then the more that you can anticipate it, the more that your present self goes, I actually will be grateful to myself for this. I'm going to make time to go back and thank myself for this. And then it starts feeling more real. And you hopefully start thinking of yourself more as yourself, not just some other person in the future. That's me. That's a version of me. And they're going to be happy that I did this thing. I think that can really help motivate us. The time of thinking about our present has ended. The time of thinking about our future has begun. Thanks for listening. I'm curious what you thought about this. Until next time. Bye-bye, my little rain clouds.